Welcome to Into the Sky, a podcast about the iconic Avro Vulcan XH558. I'm Martin Price, and this is Season 2, where you'll hear from people close to XH558, from pilots who have flown her, to the volunteers who look after her, and the team who are in charge of securing her future. Join us as we explore the history of this magnificent aircraft and learn about how she will inspire the next generation of engineers through STEM education. Look into the past to improve the future. Today I'm speaking to a volunteer, Mal Stainforth, or Mal, as he's referred to amongst his fellow volunteers. Mal has very kindly agreed to talk to us about why he takes time out to travel from Lincoln up to Doncaster to work with the team of volunteers, and hopefully share a bit about his time working on the Vulcan fleet whilst in service with the RAF. Hello, Mal.
Hello.
Mal, let's kick off with something that maybe, obviously, people who don't actually know you personally. You're quite a tall fellow, aren't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, do you see that as an advantage or a disadvantage whilst working around the Vulcan?
Well, it was quite interesting, really. When I left nav school, the Air Force had done one of its great things. Was it started to train me as a navigator, and it didn't bother measuring me until the very end. And when they measured me, there was a long list of things I didn't fit. And broadly speaking, they wanted to send me to a fast jet posting straight away. But the aircraft they wanted to send me to, I was too big for. So they then decided, well, where can we send you? And they started looking at all kinds of other aeroplanes, and it was amazing the list of aeroplanes that I didn't fit. And in the end, they turned around and said, well, you fit a Vulcan, how about flying that? And I thought, okay, fine, let's go.
So the Vulcan wasn't your choice then?
Oh, no, not at all. It was the Air Force's choice. Well, it was sort of the Air Force's choice.
Right. So what would have been your first choice?
My first choice was Buccaneer.
Right. So after graduating from nav school, as I said, the Vulcan wasn't your first choice of aircraft. You've just explained there, of course, how you ended up in the Vulcan itself. You joined the V-Force in 1976, 101 Squadron. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you say in conversations that you joined as a nav plotter, which was unusual. So what was so unusual about you being made a nav plotter?
In the Vulcan, there are two navigators. One, a nav radar, one, a nav plotter. Generally speaking, most people who come out of nav school start as a nav radar. The beauty of that is that you concentrate purely on operating the radar and all the bits and pieces that go with operating the radar. And the less kind people say that because of the pulse repetition frequency of the radar, you only do 5 seconds work in a 5-hour sortie, but I'll let you work that one out for yourself. The plotter's role is much more a role of running. You basically run the aircraft and you run the sortie on behalf of the captain of the aeroplane. And so typically I used to come in 4 hours before takeoff and plan everything that we needed to do for all the people on the aircraft in the next sortie. Now, in the V-Force, it was perceived that that was a job that needed to be done by somebody who'd got some time on the aeroplane. And therefore, the standard plan was that you did a nav radar's job first, and you then did the plotter's job afterwards. For reasons various, I was just one of the few who was selected to be a first tourist nav plotter. There are about 10 of us in the length of the V-Force history who did it.
So what you're saying is, and the nav radar is like an apprenticeship for the nav plotter. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a direct apprenticeship, but knowing what's happening on the radar side makes being a plotter easier.
Right.
So if you go straight into the plotter's job, you've almost got to learn two roles as you're going through the OCU.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So would you say that being made in nav plotter almost straight away was an enjoyable job? Were you pleased that you were made nav plotter straight away?
I've got nothing to compare it with, so it's very difficult to answer. But looking back on it, I am extremely pleased I went straight into the nav plotter's job because it was a much more natural job for me to do. I always regard myself as one of the last few classic navigators that the RAF trained. And the plotter's job was very much a classic navigator's job, as well as being a crew management job.
So you think you found being a nav plotter would have been more interesting, was more interesting than being just nav radar?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. So the aircraft that you were flying in at the time, was it the B-2?
I flew in the B-2 with the 300 series engines.
Yeah.
So they were producing about 20,000 pounds of thrust each. So, you were sat on the end of the runway with somewhere in the order of 80,000 pounds of thrust available behind you.
Wow. So yeah, a little bit more output than the Series 2 engines, is that it? Yeah. So you spent 3 years as part of the Vulcan crew, which I can only imagine in that time you became quite a close-knit group, would you? Yeah, because it's a small crew, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The way the V-Force operated at the time, you operated what were known as constituted crews. And so the captain of the aircraft and the two navigators always flew together on operational sorties. Now, we were constituted with a co-pilot and an AEO, but if push came to shove, you could actually go and do the operational job with a different AEO and a different co-pilot. And without going into too much detail, the reason that was that quite a lot of our time in the V-Force was spent doing target study for operational targets. And the captain and the two navigators had to be absolutely au fait with the targets.
Right. So, again, without going into too much detail, because obviously you were a small group, is there any particular memories that you can share with us? Whilst, maybe just a funny story of some description that happened whilst you were part and parcel of the Vulcan crew?
Well, I'll give you two answers to this, all right? The first one is fortunately brief. And we were flying one day. As we're coming to the end of the sortie, the radar unit said, we've just had a request for someone to go and photograph a ship which is discharging its tanks in the North Sea. And quite often, oilers used to clean their tanks out with seawater and just dump everything over the side. They didn't have a Coast Guard aeroplane to go and photograph it. And so we normally came off the end of a sortie with a fair amount of fuel. And so we said, yeah, we'll go and do it. And again, because of our radar, it's relatively easy for us to scan a large area of the sea and pick what seemed to be the most likely targets. And we very, very quickly found this ship discharging. Now, the Vulcan, in operational mode, had a downwards-looking camera in the bomb aimer's bay. And we actually used that for assessing bombing targets. But because we had the downward-looking camera, we were able to go and we found this ship and we flew down the trail of discharge, turned round, and then with the camera on, flew back up the trail of discharge back to the ship. And without going into too much detail, we just made sure that we got the name of the ship on the picture. And that was great. And we went home and we thought we'd done a jolly good job and what have you. And 2 days later, my captain, who was a squadron leader, and my nav radar, who was a squadron leader, both took me into an office and said, Malcolm, we'd rather you didn't talk about this incident again. Why? I thought we committed some security breach or something. And they said, actually, it was a honey wagon and they were discharging shit. And the other one I'll give you is altogether a bit more serious. We were coming out of Cyprus one day on our way back to the UK. And one of the things that we used to do in Cyprus was, as you probably know about Cyprus, it's an island where you can grow something fresh just about every day of the year. And so we quite often used to go to the fruit shop as we were leaving and buy baskets of fruit, which we put in the nose of the aeroplane. And of course, as soon as we got up to height, cabin temperature went down and it stayed cool and fresh. And this was great until we got to the top of climb. And the co-pilot laid out the imprest, which is the pot of money that we had to travel with for spending on the the provisioning of the crew and what have you. And he got all the papers lined out on the cockpit. when suddenly an engine fire warning light came on. And so the co-pilot, who normally had quite a deep voice, said, "Engine fire number 2, fairly high-pitched. And of course, bang, bang, they hit the fire extinguishers. And about 30 seconds later, he said, "Fire in number 1. Bang, bang, hit the fire extinguishers. Meanwhile, I'm looking at my map and I said, okay, straight ahead, 150 miles, we're going into Suda Bay. AEO, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." So we called Mayday and the air traffic unit just cleared everything from underneath us. And we went down into Suda Bay. As we're going down into Suda Bay, the number 3 engine fire warning light came on. This is getting very serious. And then somebody said, "This isn't right." And it turned out to be a malfunction of the engine fire detection unit. However, by now we've pumped 2 lots of fire extinguishers into 2 engines and shut them down. And so restarting them wasn't a good idea. So to cut a long story short, we landed at Suda Bay. Unfortunately, landing at Suda Bay at that time wasn't a good idea because the Greeks and the Turks were fighting. And Suda Bay was at the time a very secret operational Greek base. And as we landed, they noticed that we had a camera in the nosewheel bay. So we taxied into dispersal, and I'm normally the first one out of the airplane. And as I stepped down the ladder, I was met with a rifle. Basically, the captain of the airplane was whisked off, and he had to do some smart talking, and everything was fine. The funny side of it was, we now have a nose bay of a Vulcan full of fruit on a pan where the pan temperature was slowly rising above 40 degrees. And persuading the Greeks to give us a fridge to put all this fruit in when we'd landed on one of their secret bases was very amusing.
I was just beginning to wonder what was going to be happening to that fruit with the temperature, etc. I thought he was going to tell us that it was the fruit that had caused the problems with the fire warning systems.
No, if you remember, if you look in the nosewheel bay of the Vulcan, Taft may have shown you, the fire detection box is on the forward edge of the bomb bay. But
yeah,
a lot of the hot air between the engines goes very close to the fire detection box. If you get a hot air leak, it just starts sensing an engine fire.
Oh, right. So after your time with the 101 Squadron, you then converted to fast jets. Was it any particular type of jet that you actually converted to?
Yeah, it was a bit longer than that. I did a tour as a nav instructor back at Fittingley, and then I converted to the Phantom. And again, the story of that was quite simple. When they measured me again, they decided that I probably wasn't going to fit a Tornado. And so, on the basis that Phantoms had been built for great big Texans, they put me in it. I just fitted.
So when you say just, because is it mainly your legs that was the problem? So,
I have if you want to know the exact detail, I have a very long knee to bum length. And what that normally means is in most aeroplanes that if you're not careful, your knees hit the forward arch of the canopy as you come out. And so they do have to be quite careful. The other problem is if you've got very long legs, ideally the thighs need to sit on the seat so that when you pull the handle, the seat doesn't accelerate into your thighs. And for my entire Phantom tour, I just accepted the fact that my legs were probably going to be hurting quite a lot after I'd ejected it, if it ever happened.
And thankfully it never did.
Thankfully it never did. Although again, I came very close once.
Oh, did you? Right. That's another conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So 2017, you found yourself as a volunteer with us at 558, starting as a tour guide. It must have been some time since you was leaving the Vulcans to joining 558. So what was it that made you want to volunteer for this project? And, when there's so many other projects out there, some that's maybe even nearer to where you live.
Well, yeah, I'd been a tour guide in Lincoln since 1995. And, by then I was doing a lot of guiding at the castle, and I'd done some work with the International Bomber Command Centre and a few other bits and pieces as well. Really, I knew a lot of the crew of the Vulcan when it was flying on air displays. And it was only comparatively late on that I realised that you had a team of people showing everybody around the aeroplane. And I just wrote to Jim Debenham, the guy who was organising it, and said, actually, I'm a tour guide down in Lincoln. I've flown the Vulcan. Would I be of any use to you? And he said yes.
Well, he'd be absolutely daft to have said no, really, wouldn't he, given your pedigree? That is for sure. So, finally, just to wrap it up, Malcolm, moving forward with 558, what are the 3 things that you would like to see happen with her?
I want to see her undercover so that we can perhaps do a bit more engineering. I would like to be able to do more engine runs, and in particular, I would like to be able to do a high-speed taxi run. Because if you remember, I mean, even with the engines that we have at the moment, which are down-rated to £17,500, at the typical weights that we operate the aeroplane, if we could sit on the end of the runway and stuff, 4 times £17,500 out the back and let the brakes off, it's quite an impressive sight. And it's quite an impressive noise as well. And the third thing is, if I absolutely had my way and I can ever find enough time, and I'd have to probably go back to computing school to do it, I would like to create an electronic version of NBS so that people could see how the system worked in the aeroplane.
Wow, that'd be something. That would be something. Yeah. Malcolm, thank you very much for your time. It's been great speaking to you again.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
All right, we'll see you shortly. You take care, mate.
Okay, cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Into the Sky. We do hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to keep looking out for more episodes on the way. And if you'd like to find out more about the work of the Vulcan to the Sky Trust, or maybe if you'd like to make a donation to help safeguard the future of XH558, please visit the website vulcantothesky.org.